You've tuned into another edition of The Break Room, a weekly conversation about how the City of St. Augustine works from those who do the work every day. Hosted by the City of St. Augustine's Communications Director, Melissa Whistle, The Break Room offers a closer look at the different city departments and provides updates on current and upcoming projects and events. And now, your host, Melissa Whistle.
Welcome to The Break Room. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Melissa Whistle, Communications Director for the City of St. Augustine. This week in The Break Room, I've invited Jessica Beach, the city's Chief Resilience Officer, and we are going to talk about storm preparation, where to get information about storms, understanding what happens with flooding throughout the city, and how to be a good neighbor. Jessica, welcome back to The Break Room.
Thank you, Melissa. Glad to be here.
You and I were on our way down here, and I have to say I'm excited for our interview today because I really want to focus on talking about, yet again, it may sound like we're repeating ourselves, but let's talk about what happens with flooding. Let's start with what happens with flooding in the city when we get those big rain events.
So there's two different types of flooding that we experience citywide. The rainfall-driven flooding is when it's raining and our storm system just gets overwhelmed and the streets start flooding. And then sometimes that combines with a high tide, so then the water can't drain out. And then if we add a nor'easter on top of that, then we have the full effects of wind pushing the water in some cases up and over bulkheads, and then we have even more flooding. So we have a lot of challenges in the city, but we are certainly experiencing what they call compound flooding between the rainfall and the coastal surge.
So when we get these nor'easter, king tide flooding events, we had those back in September of 2020. We had another episode November of 2021. And I think we're kind of getting used to it, but talk me through a little bit of what that looks like. We've got a lot of new residents in St. Augustine. So I know this may sound like we're repeating ourselves, but I feel like it's a topic that we can't talk about too much. So walk us through what that looks like when that happens.
Yeah, so that's definitely something we've seen an increase in, and just questions and phone calls into Public Works, particularly with drainage and flooding and things like that. And so we do have a lot of new residents. So I think it's timely that we're talking about this because part of it's just education and awareness on what's happening. And so for the city, we're low-lying and we're a coastal community, and there's a lot of draw to that. A lot of people come to the area to visit the great weather, but there's trade-offs to that. Mm-hmm. So we have old infrastructure that's undersized. So with the combination of that, so it's subject to flooding from both the rainfall and the coast. And so as a city, we are challenged to try to figure out ways to upgrade our infrastructure and do projects that can help improve that. And so that's a lot of where we focus on. And so from the city's aspect, when we see these conditions that are going to potentially cause flooding, I think the big thing is making people aware so they can make preparations. And the city makes their own preparations. We have our stormwater crew going out, usually pre-storm. They're doing a routine check of our drains and our inlets. The big thing is the valves that we've installed, making sure that those are secure and in place and working. And they just do a sweep citywide because we have a lot of infrastructure to cover. That kind of gives us in advance of a storm. And then when the storm happens and then post-storm, then we start doing those damage assessments and cleanup and things like that.
But if I'm in a house, if I'm at 10 feet, I'm good. If I'm in that lower lying area, there's not a lot I can do, but I can be aware. And what we see is residents, I feel like they're feeling a little more informed. We're getting the message out. We're not meteorologists, but yet people look to us.
Yes. Yeah, that's definitely a big piece, is trying to connect the information with our residents. And I think, too, that awareness, and we've done a big outreach, just doing individual flood mitigation site visits, doing neighborhood outreach meetings, and talking about what is your flood elevation. Know your flood elevation risk. What is your elevation of your house? And in some cases, we have residents taking advantage of that flood mitigation assistance program through FEMA to elevate, to reduce that risk. Other homeowners are investing in ways to just kind of flood-proof their property to prevent that too.
And one of the things that we've seen that the city did in terms of helping the residents is opening the parking garage.
Yeah, that's actually something that's really easy, kind of low-hanging fruit, and it makes a big difference because these, like you had mentioned, Melissa, most of the city's in a flood zone, so that puts most of our properties at risk. So if you have those cases where we're having the surge and the rainfall and we've got the streets flooded, we saw so many cars that are parked in the street that potentially are getting flooded, whether it's freshwater or saltwater. So opening that parking garage is having a safe place to move your vehicle is huge.
So if you're listening and you're not always prepared, the city does have what's called a NICSL. It's an emergency alert. And we're not going to use it necessarily on what I would call an average or a normal king tide or a high tide. It's these big surge events that we're talking about. But we do have an alert, and it's called St. Aug Alerts. So if you send a text message to 888-777 and you type in St. Aug Alerts, you're going to be subscribed to that alert system. And we did launch that. I think we used it twice during an event that we had in November 2021. And we're really just using that to make sure that folks are being informed and alerted to the fact that we've got an exceptional tide. Maybe the waters are going to be a little bit higher. In some cases, people can't do anything, but at least they're informed.
Yeah, so I think being informed is huge. And part of that, too, is just having we know when those tides are going to happen. So we've been pushing out alerts on just king tides. And when we know those are coming, the breaking point for this city is when the wind starts picking up, and then if it's coupled with rainfall. And that's when we have to really try to monitor and determine if we're going to have that citywide flooding like we did in September 2020, November 2021. And that's when you kind of know when, we want to make sure our residents are prepared, because it's not a named storm. So
right.
People tend to not really pay as much attention, and it's maybe not as on high list of alerts and priorities. And so, but it still can have citywide impacts.
And we've been talking a little bit, too, about the city. We're not meteorologists, but we do pay attention. But folks can follow the city on Facebook and on Twitter. We're also doing a better job of communicating through Nextdoor if you're in those neighborhood communities. And the NICSL, like I said, was St. Aug Alerts to 888-777. You can also follow the National Weather Service, Jacksonville. They do a really good job.
Yes, they do. That's actually what I look at a lot, because they do the modeling and the predictions, and they push out different updates, and it's pretty up-to-date, best information that we can get. So that's what we're looking at, and then that kind of helps clue in if we're going to have that citywide flooding potentially, so then we can in turn try to relay that message to our residents. And having that weather stem at the marina has been really helpful, because it's live video feed. You can see the rainfall, you can get the winds, and it's also linked up to other alerts and emergency systems. So that's another great thing that we've been able to implement since we've been talking.
And all of these resources, of course, you can find on our website. You can follow us on social. And on social, we may not have the specific information, but we're going to give you a link to or point you to those resources and our weather stem, like you said. If you are just now tuning in, you are listening to The Break Room. I'm talking with the city's Chief Resilience Officer, Jessica Beach, and we are talking about storm prep, getting information, understanding what's happening in the city when we flood. And I want to talk a little bit, this is going to be a little bit of a touchy subject, but how to be a good neighbor.
That's very important. Probably the number one complaint we get, unfortunately, is those vehicles driving through standing water, which we try to point people away, especially when we have road closure signs and detours and things like that in place. And it's for some, they just have to get to where they're trying to go, and they create, unfortunately, a wake because they don't want to stall their vehicles out in the flooded water. But that reaction when you have that wake going through really impacts residential properties, and that's damage to homes that can happen. So it's a pretty serious issue, and it's probably one of the largest complaints that we get.
So from the city standpoint, we really do our best. We can't possibly close off every city street. We do put out barricades. We do close the bridge. We closed the bridge in the November 2021 event several times.
Yes.
Or access to the bridge, I should say. What can I do? I have to detour. I go around. The urge is there sometimes, I think, for some people, too, to just go and drive out because they feel like the storm has passed.
Yeah, some of that is the aftermath, and people just want to kind of, let's go check out and see what's happened. And that also can be just have an impact on your neighbors. And so I guess, like you said, Melissa, trying to be that good neighbor and just keep in mind that could be you, and having that wake that comes in. The water's already pretty high, and in some cases it's cresting the road, and it's getting into people's driveways. And if that vehicle comes through at any speed, that wake can push up into the garage, or sometimes it can get into the home. And that's what we see. And it's hard because now that property owner is trying to mitigate flood damage, and it's a whole nother thing that they have to deal with.
I think, too, what people don't realize is even when the tide starts to recede, it takes a while for it to come down. And so where the road is blocked, like you said, people need to get to their homes. We certainly don't want to get in the way, and we won't. stop you from getting on a street if that's where you're going. We're not going to check your ID. But we are asking that folks take that into consideration. And those high waters, like you said, you're almost doing yourself a disservice too if you're trying to drive through that high standing water. You could hit a curb, you could hit debris that's underneath the water that you don't see, damage your own vehicle, stall your vehicle.
Yes, and I think there was a lot of reports of that happening, and so that's just another reminder for residents that may not think about it, that can definitely, it's part of the personal responsibility in being that good neighbor, and keep that in consideration.
We have talked about also some of the voices that we hear is, what is the city doing? The city's not doing anything. But I've got to give you a chance here. Tell our listeners, remind our listeners, we've put in how many TideFlex valves?
Yeah, so it's been busy the past few years that I've been with the city. The Tide Check valves is probably the first program that we really launched, and we've got 43 installed to date. We have 103 total citywide. So we're prioritizing the remaining of those, trying to get grant funding to help with that. But we also have a lot of major infrastructure projects that have either been completed, that are under construction right now, or in design. And just a few of those is to remind folks, at the marina, we had the Bayfront Park project where we elevated 2 feet of some low-lying wall area there, and that was able to provide drainage improvements and also flood protection.
So that actually raised the seawall.
It did, behind the seawall. So we have like another 2 feet of flood protection there.
And that's between the marina building and the bridge.
Yes.
And then there's another portion of that.
Yes, and so the southern part where most people are familiar with is the famous, if you will, Avenida Menendez seawall with the promenade, and that's kind of like our landmark, if you will, as far as flood projects and resilience. And so we're doing the last piece of that, connecting those two elevated structures with the last piece, which is in design right now.
And that's the piece that goes from the marina south, which is where the Santa Maria used to be, or
yes.
There is that going on. So that's that last piece low-lying along
yes.
the bayfront.
Yeah, so that project's partially completed with the bayfront, and then we're doing the last piece of design. We have our FEMA 13 that are under construction right now. That's been really successful. Where we have been able to elevate, it's like about 30% done. We've been able to avoid sanitary sewer overflows. That was a big win for us as a city, just with the recent storm events and things like that, because that's not something you think about. But if the rainfall and the surge starts inundating that sanitary sewer system, that can create all kinds of issues. And so just the few that we've been able to complete so far, that's really had a big help. So once we finish the rest of those, that's going to be a huge resilience in our infrastructure.
And that was big in the November 2021 event. We had several lift stations that historically were problematic, and they didn't cause any kind of problems.
Exactly. So those are just kind of small steps that we're making progress in that area. But once that whole project's completed, for sure. So that definitely.
And those were elevating some of those, as well as doing inside work.
Like floodproofing and watertight hatching and things like that, if we couldn't physically elevate, but usually like a combination.
Okay. And a couple of other projects you want to tell us about?
So we finished a drainage improvement project in Lincolnville, where we actually added storm drainage where there was none, and that was on South and DeHaven streets. And that was, we had 2 different grants that helped fund that project that we just wrapped up last year. Then we've got our Lake Maria Sanchez project that's still under design, but that's a big infrastructure project. It's complicated, and we're seeking funding and things like that too. But the city's been busy. We've got lots of efforts and initiatives underway, and we've just finished up the resiliency study for South Davis Shores. We've looked at doing other projects citywide and seeking funding. That was a big piece, was funding that's this time of year it becomes available. So the city's been actively getting funding.
So we're busy. We're making things better.
Yes.
Can't do anything when it starts to overtop the bulkheads and the seawalls.
That is the challenge, I think, for residents. Just a reminder is we can't stop the river from rising.
Right.
And so when it does crest, the bulkheads or existing low area ground, a lot of it's on private property too. And that water is just flooding in from those areas, and then it hits the streets, and then it's really flooding even more area. So that is a challenge, and just kind of remind folks that it's, these are complicated issues and challenges that we're facing, and there's we can focus on some things with city infrastructure, but if there's privately owned properties, then there's another complication to it. So,
right. Well, we have run out of our time. A lot of great information. Thank you for coming, reminding us about all of these things about our storm prep. If you have questions, you can contact Public Works at 825-1040. And Jessica, you can always ask to speak to Jessica. She's happy to entertain any of you who have questions and concerns. Listen in. Again, we're going to talk about the FMA project. We've got grant funding out there. So if you flooded yet again, we hear you. Call the city. We can help. And just thank you again for coming.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. It was fun.
If you've missed any of this broadcast and you want to go back and listen from the beginning, you can catch us on the web at citysainogradio.com. We want to keep you informed about what's happening in and around the city and that you hear it here from the people doing the work and making it happen every day. Remember that in order to stay connected, you need to be connected, particularly during storm time. So follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at City St. Aug. Thanks for tuning in.
You've been listening to The Break Room, a weekly program addressing projects and programs offered by the City of St. Augustine. Join us each week as the city's communications director, Melissa Whistle, has in-depth conversations with the people who make our town work to meet the needs of our community. The Break Room is produced by communications specialist for the City of St. Augustine, Cindy Walker. See you at this time next week for another edition of The Break Room.